Microsoft.NET now gives software developers the ability to compile code the way you would with C++, or rather to produce compiled code in a Linux environment that has the same performance, if not better, than C++. Let's put this to the test. I didn't even get to finish my sentence before this application was able to launch in a fraction of a second. And before you ask, this application is one that has a long history with me. I started out in 2015 writing applications in C++ using GTK as my primary framework. But I also have over 20 years of experience with .NET, having been one of the original adoptees and users of C Sharp and its frameworks. And I'm also one of the original adoptees of WPF back in 2005, 2006, somewhere in that ballpark. And so I became aware of this platform, this framework called Avalonia, which allows you to build desktop applications on Linux, Mac, and Windows. My interest was primarily Linux because I basically spent 13 years investing in GTK and other frameworks like FLTK and so on and so forth. And they all, this application, this RSS reader, all versions of them were based on this SQL that you see here. It's basically a way of storing RSS feeds. So everyone has their particular application that they use to, explore different concepts. And in my case, I had been using Linux since 2007, and it became my daily driver in 2009. And so I decided to use SQLite as my database of choice. In this case, I'm showing what this particular database has in its current test iteration, which is approximately 722 records. And one of the things I wanted to do was to give a very rough estimate of the amount of data that is going through the application. Now, this is a production grade application, and what it does is it allows us, because it is open source and available on GitHub, it allows us to try out new concepts with software development. That's the main reason for this particular application. And so in this particular browser that you see, we're able to model different aspects of the software application. So let's switch over to the command line with SQLite, and let's look at these records in more detail. So these are the feeds that we have, and the feeds is basically the endpoints from which we're going to pull information. And in this case, you can have any number of feeds. It's just your classic RSS reader design. What's important is how you interact with these feeds from a network standpoint. The best way to build an application like this is to use the Unix, shall we say, Linux philosophy. The Unix philosophy, where we have a single responsibility application. It does one thing and does it well. So when I wrote this application in C++, it started out as a series of CLI applications that focused on one aspect. One aspect may be the XML and RSS parsing. Another aspect may be using curl, the curl libraries, to do the network communications. And another CLI application to manage the actual file handling. And so these are the actual articles that are then populated into the SQLite database. And how these articles are handled by the application has an impact on the performance. So we want to be cognizant of our performance characteristics with this application. So the um, having a fast software application has evolved over the years. As I said, in my own particular case, I was using C++ and a number of frameworks, right, from FLTK to SFML to Allegro Game Engine. And by the time that we that we got to, let's say 2015 or even 2020, I was basically doubling down on GTK, and so it was like you have to figure out, okay, which desktop are you going to align with? And I had aligned with the GNOME desktop because the GNOME desktop, in my view, was not only simpler, but it was much more focused, and you had a lower possibility of boilerplate in the code when it came to GTK applications. I also saw it more prominent due to the investment of Red Hat and Fedora and others. So I then decided at some point to make a version of this application in WPF. And once I did that, then once we had the rise of AI, I could say, okay, AI, let's mechanically translate this application over to Avalonia, since Avalonia has a design that is a lineal descendant of WPF. Well, as it turned out, AI didn't do it all that well, so I had to hand revise a lot of the code. And as I moved through that process of deeply revising the code, cleaning up AI slop, as some would call it, then I was able to work on these build scripts where I could experiment with different ways of making a self-contained executable or version of the application. And so it hasn't quite got to the point where you can do it with C++, where there is just a single exe, right? Okay, but it's close enough. And it's close enough for my purposes, where we have shared objects that are generated in Linux. We have an executable, and it is able to run and do so without any additional dependencies. So you can go two ways with this. You can go intermediate language, which it will JIT compile when it executes, or you can go AOT, which is what I did here, which essentially uses GCC or Clang behind the scenes and converts this .NET code over to actual binary object code that can run on the processor for the hardware architecture. So, what we end up with all of this is architectural versatility. And true enough, the application can run on Mac and Windows. But when we're looking at a Linux oriented and a Linux focused development process, what we gain from that versatility is not just the ability to run it on these other operating systems, but to also maneuver more effectively across different Linux distributions. And so this gives us you could say, maximum reusability of our code so that we're not having to choose between KDE, Qt, GNOME, and other type of frameworks. And this gives any of us who have C# capabilities maximum powers in Linux.